Folks, welcome back to the Crossing Swords podcast presented by Batavia Downs Gaming and Hotel. And we have a very special episode for here. We have a summer ahead for your Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres signed Jarmo Kekalainen, Tage Thompson's golden goal, Mitch Marner, possibly a Buffalo Sabre, and so much more. Folks, welcome back to the Crossing Swords podcast. And yes, you heard that correctly. Mitch Marner, but something that is true, that is happening. We have a great panel here to talk about all things Buffalo Sabres now and in the future. Let's bring him on. Mike Bunt. Bunty, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. We're a month away from July 1st, which means NHL draft talk, Jarmo Kekalainen, and then free agency. This should be a fun episode.
Speaking of fun, VC3, Vinny Cristiano, how are you doing on this beautiful Sunday night?
I'm pretty good. It's been a while since we've had a chance to chat, and so there's a lot of NHL and AHL and Sabres hockey topics that we have yet to talk about together. So I think this is going to be a pretty chock full episode of information.
It's going to be a full one. And gentlemen, we should probably just jump right into it. I think the big news in terms of just Buffalo Sabres front in the past week or so, bringing on Jarmo as, advisor for Kevyn Adams. Bunty, I might want to throw this your way first. I've seen you tweet about it a little bit. How does this move make you feel? And I see a lot of fans kind of, what's this about? Why is this such a big thing for you?
Yeah, this is a really big move for the Sabres. I know it's only as a senior advisor and not a GM, which a lot of fans want Kevyn Adams gone. But this is a much needed voice in the room. We're talking about a guy that was the general manager of the Columbus Blue Jackets from 2013 to 2024, has over a decade of experience leading a club, was with Ottawa, was with St. Louis. And the thing that I am excited about are two things. One, he knows how to win in a market that hasn't necessarily had a lot of success. And then number two, he is willing to take risks and be aggressive, and he's had success bringing talented players to the Blue Jackets in the past. Let's first start off with the Blue Jackets, what they were before he took over. I believe they missed the playoffs their first 11 out of 12 years as a franchise, and were swept in their only playoff series that they were in prior to his arrival. Then he takes over, and in the first 7 seasons, Kekalainen was leading the Blue Jackets. They made the playoffs 5 times. One of those seasons, they had 108 points. They had a playoff series win. During his tenure, he was able to attract people like Johnny Gaudreau, which obviously was a big-time get. I know he wanted to get closer to home. Columbus isn't exactly New Jersey, so that I still want to give him credit for being able to get Gaudreau during that period of time. He made trades for guys like Panarin, Patrick Laine, and yes, he had some misses as well. He hired Mike Babcock, and that ended up being a disaster. Never ended up even coaching a game for the Blue Jackets. But you have a general manager that isn't afraid of going against the grain and taking some chances. And what has the Sabres' problem really been? They play it safe. They don't take chances. They're afraid of risk. And when you look at the market, it's hard to win in Buffalo. It's hard to attract players to come here. Then you have tax issues. You have a losing culture. Well, a lot of this sounds familiar to Columbus. Difficulty attracting players there, losing culture. And he was able to turn it around to where they had a nice period. Now, he also deserves some blame for them falling off and really not ending his tenure correctly. But right now, where the Sabres are at, having missed the playoffs 14 straight years, they're not attracting someone that's going to get them to be cup contender status in 1 or 2 years. They need to take baby steps. And honestly, this is a much better hire than what I thought they were going to be capable of getting heading into this process.
Yeah, when I saw the news that Jarmo Kekalainen was being hired into the Sabres organization, I was pretty happy. And like Mike, you just said, it was something I didn't really expect to be a realistic possibility. With that said, there are some things that, like with any candidate you're going to get in this role, maybe can worry some folks. But quite frankly, you mentioned again, Mike, that he took chances. The organization in Columbus took chances hiring him. He was the first European-born general manager in NHL history, and that was in 2013. That surprised me. I assumed that before that, someone born outside of North America would have been, hey, an NHL general manager, but that wasn't the case. So with that said, he comes in and, like you referenced, had 5 of the 6 playoff appearances in Columbus Blue Jackets hockey history. 5 of the 6 that happened ever were under him. And so, albeit it's a relatively smaller sample size, I know Columbus comparatively is sort of a newer team. I mean, we're in the year 2025, folks. I mean, this is not like a team they were in the league 3 years. He got hired 3 years in and then took them to the playoffs 5 times. Like, he has done exactly what needs to happen. He goes to a team that does not have success and figured out how to make them, in the regular season, a team that was hard to play against and fun to watch, and then getting into the postseason, a team that could go and make some noise, albeit, maybe didn't have the deep runs that some people are focusing on. But at this point, I just think you got to be happy with baby steps. And again, just right now, all I need to see is the Sabres into the playoffs, and he's someone that could have a role in assisting the current regime to getting them to where they need to be, because they've made some moves that have worked. We'll get into that in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some extra steps that need to be taken here to get them over that first hump. And then, of course, there's a couple bigger ones after that, and we'll cross those bridges when we get there.
Exactly. And I agree with you guys too. And, I think a lot of the issues people have with Kevin Adams and issues he has with himself, where, we see in his post-season interview, he says he needs to be better every single aspect of his job. I mean, to bring in a guy like Jarmo is going to help like that. A guy with actual experience. It's not just Eric Stahl. It is a guy who, has a ton of time as an NHL GM and had success with that as well in a market very similar to Buffalo. I think this is a really big thing. I think a lot of people are wishing for something like this to help guide Adams through his first 10 years as GM and not like a head coach of the Buffalo Junior Sabres, Bantam team. But this is a good step in that direction where you have just that experience. People have been clamoring for, director of hockey operations, something to just make it so it's not just Kevin Adams and Terry Pegula kind of pulling all the strings. This is a move that I think gives fans a lot of rest, maybe internally, on the internal structure of how the Sabres are running, where you bring in a guy like this who's really been there through a lot of hockey, has done a ton for the game in terms of, bringing a lot of players over from Finland to the NHL, and a lot of things that Vinny said. It's something exciting, something I'm excited to see, and probably nothing we'll see, direct changes in terms of, oh, this is a Jarmo move, but we're going to see, I think, over the course of years, like how he's going to shape this franchise, hopefully for the better. Speaking of shaping this franchise for the better, we have 1 month until free agency, 1 month until things really start to get crazy for the Sabres, what it's going to look like. Because right now we're in a bit of a lull in terms of what the Sabres can do with the playoffs going on. The summer ahead, Mitch Marner is the big dog free agency. Before we get to that, we do have a fun video here for our guy, Mike Bunt, shouting out on the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Bunt is.
I don't know
That's
either.
Bunting's. It's a short form for Michael Bunting. Used to be a Toronto
Mike
Maple Leaf.
Bunt. The 2004-2005 NHL season was canceled due to the lockout. I don't know if you guys remember that. My first year pro. Since then, the Buffalo Sabres have 4 playoff series wins. The Toronto Maple Leafs have 2. The Sabres haven't made the playoffs in 14 years.
Oh, my God.
Bunty, you were the face of hockey Twitter, it felt like, for that day. What are you looking at for the Sabres this offseason? The Leafs collapse. What's going through your head right now as we hit June?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Now that we're finally here in the beginning of the summer, things are starting to get real. The Stanley Cup Finals are are starting any day now. And then we can talk about the NHL draft, free agency, and really what the Sabres can do to try to figure things out going forward. Now, that tweet was about the Maple Leafs and having some fun with them. And obviously, I know the Sabres have had their own issues. That's why it's all funny, because the Sabres have stunk, and yet they still have more playoff series wins than the Maple Leafs since the lockout in 04-05. Now, player on the Maple Leafs that everybody is paying attention to right now is Mitch Marner. Now, is that a realistic option? I'm not going to say it's realistic. I don't think it's likely of happening, but is it impossible? I'm not going to say it's 0%, maybe 1 or 2%, but I'm not going to say 0%. Here's the thing about Marner. He wants to get paid, and he's likely leaving Toronto. And in that type of situation, how many teams have the salary cap to really be able to make an aggressive move after him? There's not going to be a ton. So he's not going to just go from the Maple Leafs to another championship contender where he's going to be able to be a star for them right away. We're talking about teams like Chicago, Anaheim. There's a lot of random teams that are going to be going after him. Now, they probably all have advantages over the Sabres. Having a 14-year playoff drought is never going to be good in attracting a player to go. But if you're willing to outpay everyone else, who's to say that you don't at least get a conversation or you get a talk? Now, will the Sabres be willing to do that? History says no, that they won't.
But they got Taylor Hall a few years ago.
Yeah, but now you bring in Kekalainen. Maybe you have a different voice in the front office. Maybe you do go after him. And it's funny because when you bring up a guy like Mitch Marner, it brings out different reactions out of Sabres fans. You have some that are hopeful, optimists, that want to think about the possibility, that want to get excited for it. Then you have those that just don't even want to address it because they think it's unrealistic and just a waste of time. And then you got kind of people that they don't know whether to kind of talk about it or not because of the situation. Here's what I'd say. It's worth having the conversation. He is a fit in Buffalo. He's a talented winger. He's a 100-point player. And some people with their self-defense mechanisms, you'll hear them say, well, he's not a good defender. That's crap. Analytically, he's fine defensively. Other people will say, well, he stinks in the playoffs. Well, I'll tell you something. The Sabres haven't got there in 14 years. I'd rather have somebody that can help get them there. There really isn't a reason not to go after him if you're the Sabres. There really isn't any reason to go after him. And if people say, well, $14 million, well, the cap is going to go up dramatically in the next 3 to 5 years. You're going to have room to fit him in. And what are the Sabres going to do with the money anyway? What are they going to do with it anyway? Am I supposed to care about how they allocate their money? I just want them to be relevant. And getting a guy like Mitch Marner absolutely makes them relevant. And think about the line combinations. You have Mitch Marner with Tage Thompson. Oh my goodness. Tage is scoring between 50 plus in that scenario. Like Tage is a 50 plus player, goal scorer with Mitch Marner. You still have Josh Norris. Who knows what you do with Peterka and some of the lower guys with McLeod and Zucker and everybody. And who knows how the lineup ends up looking, Tuck, and so forth. But like you have the possibility to be a pretty good team, and I would expect them to make the playoffs with a Mitch Marner. I know defense is a concern, but before we get into the other possibilities, I'll just say anybody that doesn't want them to at least even make an attempt after Mitch Marner, I don't know what drugs you're on. This guy's absolutely worth it. And if you don't think it, then you're just in your Buffalo Sabres misery and you just don't want to even hope for good things.
Yeah, I understand the unrealisticness of this happening. I don't know, man. I think the point is that you have to try, and that there's a non-zero chance of it happening, especially because of all of these other factors. I mean, I don't know if Mitch Marner is tired of. You hear this sometimes from some of the bigger media markets in the NHL, that sometimes the players might get tired of being in such a big media market. Now, of course, he's coming here and becoming like the main guy, but there's a lot of attention on him in Toronto. So I think to a certain extent, he probably would have less to deal with. Maybe there's certain players that like that, and I think they thrive in those big markets. Some players maybe prefer the smaller ones. And I think for him to go to a town that loves hockey as much as Buffalo does and knows it'll be a priority, and knows that if he, I think there's got to be something said for certain athletes. And again, I don't know if Mitch Marner is one of these, do thrive in the idea that they can maybe go somewhere and help figure things out. I mean, it happens to me in NCAA football or EA Sports College Football 25 all the time. I play a home game, I lose. I had 4 recruits at the game, and I'm like, well, they're not committing. And 2 of them are like, we can help turn this program around. So now, in being facetious in that example, my comparison is that there is maybe an element that may or may not exist in Mitch Marner's inherent motivation to play hockey, which is, if I go to Buffalo, they're going to pay me better than probably any other NHL team can. Now, are your total earnings? I mean, this is a real big conversation right now on
True.
Sabres X is taxes, right? And the Sabres are like the 18th tax market in the NHL. So you're not bottom third, but you're not in the top 50 percentile, which is unfortunate, but kind of it is what it is. So you got to think that there are 17 other programs that are going to, if they offer you the same contract, you're going to take home more of that money. The other element of that is how many of those 17 teams and programs can actually afford to give you a contract that's remotely close to what you want anyway and fit you into the roster spot that you can. I don't know if Mitch Marner right now has a roster spot on the Florida Panthers, for example. I mean, I'm sure they'd love to have him. Don't get me wrong. But my point is like, where can he fit in their current salary cap?
Yeah.
Can the Bruins fit him in? Can Vegas fit him in? I don't know if that's the answer. So my point is, of those 17 teams that, if financials are the concern because of your tax thing, I would say eliminate maybe 9 of them for just doesn't fit. And then, now you're dealing with 8 other guys, or 8 other programs, I should say. And I think you could probably make a good case that you're a better destination for him than those programs. Going back to my original point, maybe part of the sales pitch is, look, dude, if you come here and you get this team to the playoffs, the first time in 14 years, you are going to be a hero forever. Your jersey sales are going to break records probably. So maybe it doesn't motivate him. Maybe that's not a thing that he is driven by. But if it is, it's just another reason to take a shot, because every once in a while you find someone that's motivated by, hey, I can go there and I can be a hero. And maybe that's something that'll help draw him here. And if he does what a lot of people think he can do, I think he can do that. He absolutely would be considered a hero.
And you want to know something too about this whole Mitch Marner thing? Everybody's talking like we know what's in his head when we don't.
Right.
Like when we all say it's impossible for the Sabres to attract him, what we're really saying is we don't want to get our hopes up because it's very unlikely that it's going to happen. But the truth of it is, has any of us talked to Mitch Marner? Has any agent, like top reporter, talked to Mitch Marner? No one knows what's in Mitch Marner's head. So the fact of it is, it's just people putting other people down without any information of knowing what's actually going on. And you look at the options. If Mitch Marner's options are go to Chicago, they're going to suck for a long time. Go to Anaheim. Are they on the cusp of being good in the West? I don't think so. But I guess in Chicago, you have a major market. But does he want to be in a major market after what happened in Toronto? Anaheim, you're going to basically just blend in with anybody. Does he want to blend in? Maybe that's good for him while being in a good weather area. Buffalo, he's close to home. He can go back and forth without the pressure of Toronto. I know everybody jokes about him being a massive Bills fan, Josh Allen. Well, if you think he has a chance, maybe you do get Josh Allen involved. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but if you're going to go after him, why not have his favorite athlete help in the recruiting pitch? I mean, I've seen crazier things done. So to me, a lot of it is we've been so bad for a decade and a half that we just don't want to even consider the fact that the Sabres might be willing to do something. I'll say this, and to connect it to the Jarmo Kekalainen stuff, I do think them bringing him in is significant and does show that they are ready to change some of their decision-making processes. They didn't bring in Eric Stahl and Jarmo Kekalainen to just do the same stuff that they've done the previous couple off seasons. Eric Stahl has written all over me, we need somebody younger in our front office that can relate to players to try to give us another recruiting pitch to get players to come here. And Jarmo Kekalainen now gives me the pitch of this guy has acquired high-level talent, in the past, whether that be via free agency or via trade, to a market like Columbus that is less than desirable. So if he was able to convince people to go there, this is what we need. They're basically, I don't want to like put down Kevin Adams in this situation, but basically it's the writing is kind of on the wall. You're basically saying, yes, Kevin Adams is technically our general manager. Yes, he's the one to pull the trigger, but Stahl is going to be the guy recruiting these players. Jarmo is going to be the one telling us what players we should be bold and try to make a move on. And Kevin is just going to be like, I'm just hoping to have my job still at the end of the year. And to me, that's kind of how I'm reading the situation, because to be honest, I thought they were going to be aggressive last summer. I thought after having 91 points and missing the playoffs by 1 point, that was going to come 2 years ago. And this is 2 to 3 years overdue, in my opinion. And with the writing on the wall, I've been saying the whole offseason, they can't return this entire roster. We've been talking about the forward room, and we say, well, I haven't even mentioned Jack Quinn on this show. No, we haven't even talked about Peterka, which we'll get to later. Like, they have a full forward room right now. So the only way you get a Marner, the only way you get some of these other guys is if you find trade partners for some of the other forwards you already have. So to me, these moves, this talk is basically indicating there's going to be a cultural shift inside the Sabres building, which means there's going to be some forwards on the way out, and that Dylan Cousins was just the beginning. And then defensively, it seems like almost an automatic. And the last thing I'll say before I toss it to you, Vinny and Gatesy, I watched some of the recent embeddeds that went on, and a lot of that stuff is fluff, and it's kind of a joke. It's a Sabres way of telling their stories.
I will say it's edited very well. The content team does a great job.
So
they do a great job.
I love it's honestly, they're very entertaining to me. I enjoy them. But one thing that I found very, very interesting about the embeddeds that were recent post-trade deadline was Lindy Ruff was talking about the culture in the room. And yes, we hear culture at the press conferences. But the way Lindy was talking about culture felt different to me. I don't think he's talking about good players, bad players, how they are in the room. The way I was taking it away from was he was talking about how they were on the ice and how they fit in with one another. Basically, my read was he thought one of the things he said was the perception of players was different on the outside. And then once I was with the organization for a while, I realized certain perceptions I had weren't reality of players. Dylan Cousins comes to mind immediately. The perception of him on the outside, two-way player, great forward, can play defense. Ruff tries to get him in that role. He stinks, but then they move on. And then, yes, I know Norris has been hurt, but you get a guy that is a talent upgrade. What I almost feel like the Sabres are trying to do, and Marner would be different if they got him, is for years they've been doing this draft and develop, hoping to get the maximum upside ceilings of these young guys. And now by trading Cousins, it's almost an acknowledgement that our development and our projected development isn't what we were hoping for. So instead of being patient still, we're going to cut our losses with some of these guys. And rather than bank on this upside, we'll trade them for a safer, more reliable veteran that fits a better role on our team, maybe provides more toughness, maybe provides a better defensive presence. And if we can get guys like that, maybe we won't have this perceived ceiling that we thought we were going to have long-term. But you know what? We're at least going to be a playoff team. And then we make the playoffs. Who knows what happens? My takeaway is they are trying to get rid of the risks and the inconsistent guys that are young, and they're going to try to get much safer guys in return. And some fans are going to hate it, but I think it will lead to a more consistent team.
We've already seen the reaping of that last year with trading away Matt Savoy to bring in Ryan McLeod, where, people were upset about that off the get-go of, what this player, Matt Savoy, could be, what he did in juniors. And they're like, oh, Ryan McLeod isn't going to be, this big point producer for the Sabres, going to be a liability. He comes in, plays basically every single center role this team had, and succeeded in that. I think we're going to see more of that next year and in the future, because the team did see success in that this past season. I don't know what that's going to look like going into the summer. Like Bun said, there's a lot of guys in that forward room group. You'd have to imagine they're not just going to run back the same 12 and call it an absolute day. We'll see what Kevin Adams does. In terms of the Marner stuff, too, I want to put a quick bow on that. Like what Bun said, no one really knows what's going through their head. So I think as Sabres fans, we should probably just look at the good things, because we could go back and forth all day of like, he's close to home, which is good. But, there's this negative part. Buffalo has made the playoffs in 14 years, whatever it is. We have a month till we even have to have that conversation. I think who knows? We got Taylor Hall just a few years ago coming off a Hart Trophy. Anything's really possible. You bring these changes to the front office, hopefully changes there. Anything can really happen. I mean, speaking of change, there's not really a ton of change happening Stanley Cup Finals, especially because like every other year, we still have some fun Sabres doing some big things in the postseason. Obviously, you have Reinhart, Rodriguez in Florida, Jeff Skinner, who would have thought, scores his first ever playoff goal for Edmonton just last game. And gentlemen, how are you feeling about the Stanley Cup playoffs? June 4th, game 1. What do you think going into the Cup Finals here?
I'll let you start, Vinny.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm this is a very, what's the word I want to use to describe, like, boring take on my part, but I was hoping for something different, to be honest. It doesn't mean I'm not going to watch hockey, but this admittedly was cool. Funny story about this, actually. I was so this game was on. I see Edmonton go up 1-0, and I thought, man, I had a feeling Edmonton was going to win this game anyway for whatever reason. But I was like, I heard a report that Jeff Skinner was drawing into the lineup, right? And I was like, hey, Jeff Skinner's playing his first playoff game since the first round, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know what I want to do? Just because I loved watching Jeff Skinner play, and I was bummed when he wasn't a Sabre anymore. I was like, I'm going to try to bet on Jeff Skinner to have a point today. Like, I'm going to put, you got one of those like free same game parlay tokens or whatever it is.
Yep.
And I go on, I don't remember which app it was, but everything locked. I was like, man, that stinks. Like I just put a little parlay together and it's all locked. I can't submit anything. So I walk back in like my living room, and Edmonton's now up 2-0. And I was like, all right, well, they'll drop the puck and then it'll unlock. So I put my phone down, I get like a glass of water, and I look at it and I refresh, and everything's still locked. And they scored the third goal before anything unlocked. You could bet on Dallas players to score all day long and twice on Sundays, but you couldn't bet on any Edmonton players to score. My Jeff Skinner to score a goal thing was sitting right there in the queue, and I couldn't do it. So I was bummed. I lost out on I would have bet like 76 cents on it, like made like $8, but I mean, still, I was bummed. That would have been a neat little bonus. But point being, that was fun. Second point, I was really hoping to have a different Cup final than Edmonton, Florida, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I would have Winnipeg is one of those teams that's like, I don't know of many people that don't like Winnipeg that are in I don't know that many, I'll call it American hockey fans, don't like the Winnipeg Jets. Obviously you have other rivalries, especially in the Western Conference, but I don't have any ill will towards Winnipeg. I would have liked to have seen them gone far. I like watching Hellebuck play. Their top line is fun. I didn't hate the concept of Dallas playing in the Cup final. I know that that's kind of tough to say when you're a Buffalo Sabres fan, but I don't know. I think I have more ill will towards like Eastern Conference teams, especially Eastern Conference teams that
Agreed.
Have already been there. And yeah, I definitely didn't want like that semifinal in the Western Conference. I was pulling for whoever won the Jets Stars series because I didn't really care to see the Golden Knights or the Oilers in the final again that badly. But personally, I mean, it's been good hockey. It's been plenty of good hockey. I mean, there's been some really good games. The goaltending performances have been surprising, to say the least. I mean, we had that early playoff storyline about how Hellebuck struggled. And then then jumping ahead a few rounds, Ottinger gets pulled in that same game we're just talking about with Skinner. And I thought for sure they were going to put him back in to start the second. And he's still on the bench for whatever reason. And it doesn't really, at the end of the day, matter anyway. Or does it? That turned out to be a bit of a closer game than I think originally it was played out to be. And so maybe that was the right move. And then he gets thrown under the bus. Bobrovsky still looks good in the East. It's been, especially between the pipes, man. This has been a really interesting Stanley Cup playoffs. So I guess we'll see how the final goes. Oh, and then I'm forgetting one of the bigger but maybe less popular storylines. Stuart Skinner is either I let in 7 goals or I have a shutout and that's clean slate. That was hilarious. We'll see if that stays up against a Panthers team that can score with the best of them. And I don't know. We'll see. It's a rematch, so now you've got like the book on the other team a little bit. I originally did not think Florida was as strong as they were last year at the beginning of this playoffs, and now I think they might even be better. I mean, they are so good at hockey; it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions here, and I'm going to talk about 2 different things. So
Get them off your chest.
excuse me if I'm long. The first thing, the playoffs have been boring. And yes, even when there's good hockey, I think that the NHL has legitimate issues. Some of them their own fault, some of them outside of their own hands. TV ratings in the U.S. are down 28% right now. Yeah. When you're a league like the NHL that already has low TV ratings, going down almost 30% is a bad sign. They were surging in Canada. Yeah, a lot of Canadian teams up there. That doesn't secure you ESPN or TNT money going into your next contract. So I think the NHL should be concerned about that. Number 2, it does not benefit them that they continue having Southern teams dominate this sport. Yes, I know why they wanted Southern markets to be successful. They were trying to expand their reach. They've had some success in that. But having Southern teams dominate this league is part of the reason why the ratings are down. And it's going to cost them millions of dollars in TV contracts in the future if we continue having low-rated Stanley Cup finals with teams like the Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning in them every single year. People say they want to talk about stars. The problem about the NHL is that the general sports fan in the United States isn't tuning in to watch hockey games because of stars. If you're a football fan, if you're a hockey basketball fan, if you're a baseball fan, and you don't live in a hockey town, you're not watching the Stanley Cup Finals regardless of who's in it. It could be Sidney Crosby versus McDavid. You're not watching it. Why? Yeah. Because outside of hockey markets in the U.S., people don't care about hockey. It sucks, but it is what it is. So when you have teams in these hockey markets in the South that have limited fan bases to begin with, it's just not bringing people in. And then the second thing that is a pain as a result of it is the NHL playoff format is a complete joke. Ever since the focus on divisional matchups, you know what happens? We get great first round and great second round matchups because it's divisional contests that are tight. And then we get conference finals that stink. Carolina versus Florida, 4-1. Dallas, Edmonton, what was that? 4-1. Yep. Like neither of those were even exciting. And you know what the funny thing is? Somebody gave me a mock. If we went to the 1-8 system that we had in the past that preceded this, those both would have been first round matchups. So what are we doing here? The problem with the NHL playoff format is conceivably the second best team in the entire NHL could play the third best team in the NHL in the first round, while the 11th rated team could play the 12th rated team. And this is actually not even good for the best teams in hockey because then you have one of the top 3 teams eliminated in the first round in that scenario. And then you have a team that's 11th or 12th advance. It's a messed up system. And then it also limits possible matchups. If you're going through division matchups the first 2 rounds, that means you don't normally see a team like, New Jersey play a team like Boston in the first or second round because one of them would have to be a wild card versus another team that wins the division. It limits possible matchups. So the whole format is mathematically flawed. It's metrically a mess. It's a joke of a format. It's a minor league format. The league doesn't care because they say it's bringing rivalries, but these teams only play 3 times in the regular season anyway. So how are you actually improving rivalries? And it's the reason why teams like Toronto get eliminated in the first and second round every year, because no matter how good Toronto is, they have to get past the Florida Panthers, who are a horrible matchup for them. So Toronto could get 130 points, and guess what? They're going to lose in the second round still because they got to get past Florida, while somebody in the other division doesn't have to play Florida, like Carolina, and they get all the way to the conference finals. What type of league has it to where better teams get penalized for being in the divisions that they're in? It's a joke. It's stupid. It defies logic. So that's my first thought on the NHL playoffs. I try to have a tweet about it, but you can't talk common sense on X, because you only have 280 characters, and anybody that disagrees with you just calls you an idiot. The second thing that needs to be talked about is this tax situation with Florida and some of these southern markets needs to be addressed. And I'm tired of people saying, well, why don't you just learn how to beat them? Here's the thing about sports. You can have an advantage and still be incredibly well run. Tampa Bay and Florida, two great run organizations with a lot of great players. They would be successful no matter if they were in Tampa, South Beach, Buffalo, Toronto, Vancouver, anywhere in the country. No matter where they are, they would be successful. But would they have been as successful as they've been? Probably not. And people are going to say, well, 15 years ago, they were stinking. Nobody said anything back then. 15 years ago, we didn't have the analytics and metrics we have now. What analytics and metrics have done is they have exposed any weaknesses in thought and strategy. So now every teeny advantage gets magnified and gets so much bigger now because the margins are so thin in sports like hockey. This tax stuff is a problem. If somebody is deciding to stay in Florida for $8 million versus going to Toronto for $11 million, that's a $3 million gap. Mm-hmm. And even if you said, well, Toronto could have paid the 11. Well, that's $3 million less Toronto has for a depth player that might be important for what they need. And you have all of these cities with different tax codes. How are we in professional sports where any team has an advantage over another due to tax code? People then say, well, what about the other leagues? Well, in the NFL, if you play for the Miami Dolphins, you're taxed when you play your game check in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. So half of their games, they're getting taxed based on where their opponent is playing. So they're not just getting Florida taxes. They're getting taxes in other locations. The hard cap is a joke. MLB doesn't have a salary cap. So MLB doesn't have these issues because it's whoever wants to spend the most. And then in the NBA is such a different league than the NHL from every facet. It's not about bottom line. They're all getting max contracts of $50, $60 million anyway. What is $1 to $2 million to them? Not much. And then on top of it, in the NBA, they're wanting to play in big markets where they can get all the publicity, get the super teams. In the NHL, how are teams supposed to compete with what Florida and Tampa and Dallas and them all have going on? You look at this is another example of it. The last 6 teams to represent the Eastern Conference in the Stanley Cup Finals are all in Florida. 3 in Tampa, 3 in Florida. The Dallas Stars have gone to 3 straight Western Conference Finals. They have a beneficial tax system. The Vegas Golden Knights, they have beneficial things in place in Vegas. The teams that are dominating the sport right now are the teams in the places that have the benefits. Those are the teams that are making the runs. It's so obvious it's making an impact. Now, I get it. People want to say, you got to beat them. You got to do some stuff. Kevin Adams got killed for bringing up the palm trees and everything. And yeah, we laughed about it. It's funny. He's not supposed to say it as a GM. A GM is not supposed to be making excuses for the lack of performance. But there's some truth in what Kevin Adams is saying. How is he supposed to recruit people to Buffalo when they're paying higher taxes? It's a losing culture. And you're talking about cold weather, small market versus, and then toxic fan base on top of it versus Florida, Vegas, Dallas, Tampa, where you know what happens if you're going to the Florida Panthers? Sam Reinhart could score 20 goals in a season and have 35 points and be a minus 30. You know how many people in Florida are going to care? No one. No pressure. Zero pressure. He's getting the money. He's not getting taxed on the money, yet he's in a winning culture. Sam Reinhart could break Wayne Gretzky's single season goal record and score 100 goals in a season. Do you know how many people are going to notice him on a beach after winning his 5th straight Stanley Cup? 3 or 4 people. They live, they're basically hockey players down there without any of the bad things that go along with being a professional hockey player. These tax issues need to be addressed. The NHL is minor league, and they don't think that this is an issue. And both of these are problems that any other league would address if they were run by professionals.
So I guess I'm wondering. Hey, I don't know what the solution would inherently be. I assume that it's the thing about there is still an advantage in like the NFL, for example. When you play at home, you play 8 home games, right, or 9 home games every other year. So you do have that advantage. But it's also the roster is significantly bigger, so you have more play with whatever the contracts have more. Oh my gosh, you like, hey, I'm going to get incentive is the word I'm looking for. Thank you. You have more incentives that you can mix in that will it'll make it easier to circumvent the cap, right? And you always say, like, in the NHL, or not the NFL rather, like the cap isn't real, and it is, but it's a lot easier to circumvent. I mean, in the NBA, this is a different league. Comparatively, roster size wise, it's smaller, right? But I mean, right now you've got the Indiana Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder playing for the finals, right? And you had the Knicks, so that's a big market. And you had Milwaukee, right? It's smaller market. So it was that was an interesting conference final in the NBA. So I guess you could try to adopt their model if it's at all different, but I don't know what the solution is from a tax perspective in the NHL, because I don't know that they have. I don't want to say they don't have the resources, but like I find it very difficult to circumvent that problem. The other thing, I guess, and I would be interested. That's more of a question than is a statement. Like, if there's a good solution, I'm interested in hearing it, and I just haven't seen one yet. So that's a question. My second point, I guess, I do want to. I don't want to say disagree, but yeah, I guess you're not wrong that there is less concern or less attention paid in some of those southern markets to hockey players. So you're absolutely right. I mean, yes, Sam Reinhart could win 5 straight cups, go to the beach, hang out, and he might not be noticed by many people. I think that's absolutely correct. But I think this goes back to that Marner conversation, for me at least, in thinking for some players, that's a good thing. But I think for some players, that's also a bad thing. I mean, I think, yeah, there's a disadvantage when you go small market and up north and high taxes. Like, there's a lot of boxes being checked off against the Buffalo Sabres situationally. But I think there are some players that do want to have attention paid to them. I think that there are some guys that when they go out, they want people to know who they are. And I think they want hockey to matter, because I think there are some players in the NHL who are good at playing hockey, and that's their job, and that's how they go and make money, and they want to win, and they want to compete, and they want to do X, Y, Z. And there are some players that play because, I'm not saying that not everyone loves the game, but I think the love of the game and the want for the sport of hockey to be appreciated is an element that plays into what some NHL players use as decision makers on where they go. So I think to a certain extent, I don't know that every NHL player is thinking, hey, if I go to Florida, I can just off the hook when I leave the rink. I think some guys don't want that.
Yeah. I think too,
but it is playing a bigger and bigger role, because it's also an incredible place to live. And that's not to like punish them, but these are realities of the situation. And yeah, if you want to play in a big place, you can go to New York, you can go to Boston, you can go to Chicago, Detroit, any of these major markets. The fact of it is, we are seeing a shift in the way things are going in the NHL, and players and people themselves are starting to change. Not as many people embrace I want to be under constant scrutiny at all times mentality. And what you're starting to see is a lot of people are like, you know what? I would love to go to Vegas. They got a great culture. It's a fun city, and I get to keep a little bit more of my money. Some people are like, I'd love to go to Florida. I would love to go to Dallas. And what we're seeing is, it used to be you wanted to play in all the big markets. That is now being looked not as positively as it used to be. And I get it. Every market's going to have its pros and cons. But a lot of this is to acknowledge, what pros do people have in Buffalo right now? Like, we can talk about wanting to attract players in Buffalo. And yes, maybe there's no excuse to not go after Marner. But like, you look at in Buffalo, if you're the GM, what is your selling point? Even when the Sabres have had their best eras of hockey, they couldn't attract players via free agency here. So you're talking about a franchise that is, and this is all well known. I don't want to like harp on the Sabres and be negative, but like, and like be all forgiving of Kevin Adams. We're talking small market here, cold market, losing culture, very little history as far as cups. Yes, they were a winning team and a playoff team forever. Taxed higher, division bottom feeder, and then like really the only thing you have in your favor is that you're somewhat close to Toronto, where a lot of players are from. But when you put all that together, it's just there should be no imbalances at all in professional leagues. Everything should be level for everybody. And that is the problem I have with the NHL playoff format and the taxes. It's that both of those are things that they create unevenness. And when you have the ability to address it, how do you just let it sit there? And you're right. I don't know what the answer to the tax thing is. But and to answer kind of the 15 years ago, why wasn't it a problem then? Because those organizations were run poorly and they couldn't take advantage of their situations at that point in time. You still have to have smart people running your team and you still have to have good players on the ice. But when you see an example of players taking a $3 million discount over 4 or 5 years to stay, like Sam Reinhart should be getting paid $12+ million a year right now. And he's in Florida for next to nothing. Like, and maybe he wanted to stay in Florida. But Florida, and maybe he did Florida a favor. But you don't hear about players turning down $3+ million. We're now getting to a spot where that if it is 2 million, even if it's 3 million, say it's one player, say it's two players, say you save 2 million on one player, 3 million on another. That's 5 million more that you have to get another good line mate.
Well,
That adds up. And now we're starting to recognize how they're benefiting from it. And they've been able to be aggressive with making trades and fit in a lot of these guys. And at the same time, there's other organizations in the North that are having to spend 2-3 million to get a same caliber player. In a hard cap, that is not fair. It's just not fair that just because of a province's or a state's tax situation, that a team is going to be penalized like that. And some people say, well, blame the province. Well, Buffalo Sabres aren't going to convince the New York State government to change their tax code. And the Toronto Maple Leafs and none of these Canadian teams who have it even worse than the Sabres are going to be able to convince Canada to do anything against that. But no, you can do? You can change it to where factoring in taxes every year, you give the Canadian teams a little bit more room on the cap. Or you could say with Florida, you have lesser taxes, you have a little bit less room. Now, I don't know how exactly that would work. I don't know how you balance it. But to do nothing about it, to not even try to do anything about it, it's typical NHL. Like the Stanley Cup that the Sabres lost against the Dallas Stars. We all know it was an illegal goal. We all know it was wrong, but the league did nothing about it. This is the stuff that bothers me about the NHL. When things are wrong in other leagues, they address it. When things are wrong in the NHL, they just shove it under the carpet and they pretend like it's not even a real thing.
Yeah. And to close, perfect timing. And to close out, that point on NHL and taxes is, we're talking different leagues. And like, I guess the closest comparison to NHL is NBA. You see the two teams in the finals now. They were able to build with youth of selling off older players, building through the draft and young guys. The NHL is not a star-driven league where you just have, 1-2 guys and that's it. It is much more about depth, the players you can build around your star guys. That's where those 2, 3, 4 million extra dollars go into things. That's why this is such an important thing is, you see the NBA, you can build around a Tyrese Halliburton, you bring in some guys around him, but your depth and your 10 through 15 aren't as important as, or 10 through 13, whatever, are important as the rest of it. NHL, each guy is important. You talk each offseason, people are up in arms about what fourth liner is going to come in and play 6 minutes a night for $900,000 a year. Like that is, the nature of the game where that extra money does come into things. We do have a lot more to talk about. We're 50 minutes in. Thank you to everyone watching the Cross Swords podcast. A little bit off the Sabres path, Rochester, They were on a good playoff run. Things unfortunately come to a bit of a halt here. Their season's done. Vinny, I know this is your neck of the woods, an area you know very well. Can you kind of talk about Rochester, maybe their shortcomings here, and maybe just kind of wrap up their playoffs altogether?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I, like every Sabres fan, yeah, was really hoping that Rochester could capitalize on having some of the better players in the league and having one of the best goalies in the league in the playoffs. Unfortunately, and this is kind of relevant based on what we were just talking about, they I don't want to say suffered, but ran into just a really bad AHL playoff system. The way the AHL does the playoffs is even worse than the way the NHL does by far.
Yeah.
Part of that is because of travel and just the league not being able to spend as much money to get teams to go back and forth and quite as far. So to a certain extent, they're handcuffed in that regard a little bit. But basically what happens is like it's just completely divisional all the way like into the conference finals, basically. Right now, Laval and Charlotte, the Checkers, are playing for the Eastern Conference Finals. And Rochester ran into Laval in the third round, and Laval is the best team in the AHL. In the first round, there was a bye. Rochester was the 2 seed, so they were able to not have to play in that first round series. Then they go up against Syracuse, which is the team that they lost to last year. And a lot of the complaint about Rochester's performance in last year's Calder Cup playoffs was that they weren't physical enough against a very physical Syracuse team, and they basically got bullied. And this year, that wasn't the case. Rochester did some of the bullying, and they didn't back down when Syracuse did bring that physicality that they are known to bring. So when they responded with continuing to score and being able to outspeed that physicality while answering it a little bit, that helped them to prevail over Syracuse in the second round. Now, then they go on and again, they're going to play the Rocket. And that's a tall task. I mean, there's really no two ways about it. They ran into the best team in the AHL in probably a round before they deserved to, because quite frankly, Rochester was maybe the third best team in the AHL this year. And unfortunately, there were still 8 teams alive when those two went up against each other. I don't know if Gates, you have the ability to pull up even at the very beginning, the bracket for the AHL, the Calder Cup playoffs. It is just a mess. So there's each division, a different amount of teams get in the playoffs. And the matchups, there are seeded. There's not like a divisional, or there is a divisional, but it's not like intra-divisional matchups. Yeah, this is it. Good luck figuring that out. Because as you can see in the Atlantic Division up on the top right, so this is where Charlotte comes out of. They played Hershey. Hershey is a perennial contender. More teams get in the Atlantic Division than in the North Division do. And then if you look, there's like a double bye. Yeah, so it's just, I mean, I was confused the first time I saw it. But in the Pacific Division, 7 teams get in, and only 5 get in the North Division. It just makes very little sense. So again, travel, like I would love to say, hey, the North and Atlantic divisions, it should be 1 through whatever, right? Like if you're going to do a first round between Providence and Springfield and Wilkes-Barre, Scranton and Lehigh Valley and Toronto and Cleveland, of those 6 teams, if you're going to do 1-6, 2-5, 3-4 situation, do it. That's fine. But I understand you maybe don't be able to because of travel. But I really think this system, like it should not be a situation where you have Laval and Rochester playing against each other in what is the division finals, because they are the 2 of the 3 best teams in the entire AHL this year. No question about it. I'll move on from that point though, finally. So in that division final, Rochester is playing the first 2 games at home, then they got to go on the road for the next 3. And in the first round against Syracuse, everything was firing for them. And I think that's just because they were a better team than Syracuse. Then they go up against Laval, and it's a team that can answer basically every punch that Rochester threw at them. And you had a couple of issues that came up that they weren't really able to bounce back from. The first of which was that Levi looked human. I mean, he didn't look terrible. He just didn't look like a superstar in the way that he had in the first couple of series. The best player in the playoffs for Rochester was Kel Clegg. which is hilarious, but he did what he was fantastic, led them in point. He was tied for goals after the first round by any player. He's a defenseman. And you can see there, Levi, I mean, his stats were okay, but it was a very humbling best of 5 series against Laval. And they're a really good team, but quite frankly, that was one area that I think a lot of fans looked at and thought, well, Levi wasn't playing up to the standard. I think the other element of that was Laval's speed they were able to just maintain puck possession a lot easier than a lot of other teams are able to do. That puts Levi in bad positions sometimes because Laval is able to go wall to wall with the puck. So that, while that is a goal against, and Laval's maybe got Levi with an 840 save percentage in one of the games. 2 of the goals he's got no chance on, and they got 2 goals on 5 shots. Well, maybe one of them's a power play goal, and the puck movement is putting your goalie at a disadvantage, and that's on your team's defensive positioning to not allow that to happen. They did run into a couple of injuries, and I think ultimately, and you can see his stats here, and they just average out. They just get more regular, right? There's really, again, you can't say that this is uncalled for, but as you look here through Syracuse, those first 3 games, he's got a .926 save percentage in game 1. Rochester actually went down 2-0 in that game and came back to win. Then he puts up back-to-back shutouts. Then game 1 against Laval at home allows 5. That was a tough one. Then you go to game 2, not nearly as good because he only saw 16 shots, allowed 3. The first game, it was a higher volume. And again, in the next game as well, you look at that and you see 16 saves on 20 shots total. There's just not a lot of volume, and he was sort of porous. And then you go the game they win, right? 2 of these games. You can see here, so he wins the one game that he allows 3 on 19 shots against. That's just Rochester playing very, very solid defense. They locked down there. They got tired in the second. They dialed back in. You move on to that group of 3 as they go to those winner go home games. And it just at times seemed like they didn't have the energy to continue. Laval pinned Rochester in their zone a lot. And as I end up stopping the ramble here, the biggest thing they were missing was contributions on a consistent basis from some of the players that consisted all year in the regular season. Brett Murray was maybe left a little something to be desired in the playoffs. Interestingly enough, I mean, I think a lot of people, Rusick had a really difficult, maybe regular season, and then he really dialed it up in the postseason. Kulik was solid as advertised. Josh Dunn won one of the games completely by himself, basically, which was incredible. Roseanne looks good. I thought Costa Helenius was maybe the best skater as a forward for Rochester. His ability to not lose the puck when he had it was impressive. But really, as you go, it takes, look, Noah Osland, 14th in points. He had 2 through 8 games. Ryan Johnson, again, is someone who maybe it would be touted as more of an offensive defenseman, only had 1 point. And as you look down that list, I challenge you to find Brett Murray all the way at the bottom. He didn't have a single point in the postseason. And he was -6. I don't know. It's very possible he was battling an injury. I haven't seen that. I'm sure Let's Go Amerks on Twitter has some more information on that. But
he's below Levi.
It's just, it's really, that was a shock. If you would have told people going into the postseason that Brett Murray was going to have 0 points through 2 series, you would assume that he got hurt. And no, he played all 8 games. And maybe he was injured and playing through an injury, which is admirable, and a lot of players did that, but that's really not something you expected, considering, you look there, he had 49 points in the regular season, and for a while was playing at a point per game pace. So it was just, I think it was maybe a unceremonious end to an otherwise fun season. But my point here ultimately is that I think there's a bit of an overreaction to, this is really funny, by the way, that Levi did not record a point in the postseason. I think there's a bit of an overreaction to Rochester losing in the division finals again, and Levi looking human. I think there's more there than just Levi didn't play like a lot of people were used to seeing Devin Levi because of all the shutout numbers. But I think the bigger story there is I want people to take into context the fact that it was Laval, and I hope that I'm not wrong if like Charlotte upsets Laval this round and then makes them look silly, but I mean, they ran into the best team in the NHL, and the best team in the NHL looked it for basically the entirety of that series.
Yeah, Bunty, you want to tack anything,
He
Rochester?
got it all. He got it all.
I mean, Vinny, you cleaned up.
I watched every game, man, and they were good games. There was good hockey. It was really
they're a
good
lot of
hockey.
fun to watch. It's too bad AHL TV is about 3 mortgages a month to pay for.
Yeah,
But
don't get me started. I don't want to get too in the weeds on flow hockey, but yeah.
Hey, we can move on because I mean, we're now in. Thank you to the nearly 3,000 people who've clicked on to watch us talk Buffalo Sabres hockey in June when they haven't played in about 3 years. It feels like. We had gentlemen. There's been a lot of fun conversation, a lot of good things to talk about. I think the most fun, the most exciting thing has been JJ Peterka, Bowen, Byram, both RFA free agents starting in a month from now. And there's been a lot of talking on the internet, on the Everything app about what's going to happen with these two. We see JJ Peterka listed on Frank Saravelli's #1 draft target. We saw him there at the trade deadline. Sabres don't move him. Right now he's listed at #1. Bowen Byram, I believe, is #4. How are we feeling? Because we had a great mock trade. I think we all remember the Eichel saga just a few years ago and what the Rangers wanted. They're untouchables. Their guys are now playing in the overseas in like the 5th league in Denmark. They were untouchable for Jack Eichel. We have a new fun one right here. The Buffalo Sabres give up JJ Peterka and Bowen Byram for Keandre Miller, Brendan Othman, Brett Berard, and a 2026 5th-round pick. What is going on here? Obviously, we can talk other Peterka, Byram things, but how are we feeling with those two, Bunty? I know you got a lot on your mind regarding the German 23-year-old.
Yeah, so this mock draft trade is
makes me laugh.
Yeah, it's a joke, so I'm not even going to give it time of day. But I will say, you talk about Peterka, there definitely is some smoke there. Now, whether it's legitimate or not, who knows? Chad DeDominicis has shot it down a few times.
Yeah.
And other reporters during the trade deadline shot it down with Peterka at that point in time. But when you continue to hear it, it makes you wonder if there is something to it. Byram, I feel like, is almost a guarantee to be moved this summer. And it's not even that Byram isn't a good player. It's more so he wants to be that first pair D. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen in Buffalo. And when it does, it's going to be as a result of being with Dahlin. So you already have Dahlin at $11 million per year. You have Power with the $8+ million per year. You really can't pay him $7-8 million to keep him. And if when they isolated him away from Dahlin and the production wasn't really that good, you basically know you can pair almost anybody with Dahlin and get decent results. You need to find someone that can pair with Power and bring the best out of him. So right now, I don't know where he fits it. He's not going to be on the Sabres power play because that's already taken. So that's one of his skill sets that you would have liked to see. And it does kind of stink because if Bo Byram was like a $4 or $5 million defenseman, I think you could find a way to keep him in Buffalo, and you'd be really happy about having a guy of his talent going forward, even if it is a little bit of a redundant skill set. But if he's going to want a long-term deal and get more minutes and higher pairing, it's just not going to happen here. And the reason why he's tradable is because there is going to be another team that will likely give up something solid for a guy like that, who is a former top 5 pick, who has won a Stanley Cup in Colorado and played a huge role in their Stanley Cup run. And to be honest, you look at him from a numbers perspective, he does have good numbers. If you just look at the analytics, he looks great. Now, don't tell anybody to like isolate the non-Dahlin splits because then they might be like, oh, like that's a little scary. But teams normally, as much as we talk about how teams aren't willing to will and deal with Kevin Adams, there's some teams that think that players in Buffalo are just in a bad situation, that they can get the best out of them in other situations. That's why Colorado took a chance on Casey Middlestat. And it doesn't always work out that way. So the Sabres have actually won a few trades in recent times. The problem is that they just don't have enough players overall on the team. I think Byram can get them a piece back that they want. Now, do they try to find someone to pair with Power with that? Do they try to make a forward move with that? I don't know. It sounds like Byram, most likely, if he's getting moved, it's probably going to be for more of a more responsible, defensive-minded right-hand D to go with Power, to give Power some more security to be able to play aggressive himself and know that someone's going to have his back and help him out. Now Peterka, he's the interesting one here. So
Wild card.
this is what I say about Peterka. There's going to be a lot of fans that would be really upset if he got traded.
Mm-hmm.
I am not one of those people. And it's not that I don't like Peterka. I really do like Peterka. And I don't want to just give away every young Sabres prospect that scores 25 plus goals. But as we said earlier, the Sabres forward room is busy. It's crowded. If you can acknowledge that you have Tage, Kulik, Benson, Norris, Quinn, Peterka, McLeod, Greenway, Zucker, Tuck. That's 10 guys for 9 spots right there. Now maybe you move Greenway down to the 4th line, but you got a lot of guys right here. My thought process with Peterka is it sounds like him and the Sabres are both hesitant about agreeing to a long-term contract. Peterka sounds like he's not entirely sure he wants to bank his entire youth and young part of his career in Buffalo. And the Sabres are probably hesitant about giving a young player a long-term contract with good money after what happened with Dylan Cousins and a few of the other guys that they've rewarded in the past. So right now, these are my thoughts. If Peterka can get you a player in return that is a solid veteran with a safe ceiling where you know you can get consistency on a nightly basis, I'm okay with making the move as long as you're getting somebody really solid in return. But I'm not making the move for draft picks. I'm not making the move for prospects. I'm not making the move for bottom line people. If you're going to be giving up a 23-year-old who's approaching his peak in his prime of his career, you better be getting somebody back that's already a 60-point player or 50-plus point two-way player who's going to add some grit to your team, that can add some difficulty playing against, because he has the value. Somebody's going to find some value in him. So if you're going to trade him, you got to get something back. I don't want to say anybody's untradeable on this team because we don't know what Peterka is yet. We don't. He had a 50-point season 2 years ago. He had 67, 68 points this past year. Is that somebody you want to give $8 million to right now? Is it? Is that? Do you feel if we gave $8 million to Peterka today, and 2 years from now he's 40-point pacing with 20 goals a season, and he's a -10, how are we going to be feeling about it at that point? On the reverse, if he goes to Dallas or New York, and then he's scoring 35 goals, putting up 87 points, and he's a +15, and we got a 47-point player back or a 50-point player back like Dylan Cousins, we're going to feel pretty bad about it too. But the long and short of it is they need to make some moves to make them playoff caliber. And despite his scoring, does Peterka make them closer to making the playoffs or further away? Because the one thing that does need to be said, when you're a bad team, you're still going to have players getting points and scoring goals. But sometimes you have people in elevated roles that they wouldn't be elsewhere. Is Peterka a second-line player in Buffalo, a first-line player in Buffalo, as a result of circumstance of being on one of the worst teams in hockey? Or is he truly that role? Because we thought that him, Cousins, and Quinn were all that role a couple years ago, and we whiffed on 2 of those 3.
The chances of whiffing on all 3 are very small, though. So
it must be poetic.
Look, I put my Peterka jersey on because I love this guy. I really do. And for some reason, out of the draft, when we got him, he was one of the players that I found myself enjoying watching most. Quite frankly, there's a reason. If you go back podcast after podcast, I've kind of talked about Costa Hellenius a couple times. Yeah. I really enjoy watching that guy play hockey. Peterka is similar. So on a personal level, I would be really bummed to see him go because I like watching him play, and there's no guarantee that whatever we get back, I enjoy watching play hockey in blue and gold nearly as much. But I will say this, I admit to struggling between two schools of thought in this conversation because yes, there is a version of Peterka that would get us more. We can't look 3 years in the future and know that, hey, the Sabres made the playoffs next year with or without Peterka, and the player we got for him, or players or whatever, assets, I'll call them, did or did not help us to do that. And there's a version of that with Peterka and without, right? Those are the two absolute, you can't have either one. But my other point is, I don't know that I think there's an element of you can't just keep the same players over and over again. The other element is, and I kind of want to go back to that conversation about like what are your draws to like get players to come to Buffalo? When you have a system of we've drafted all of these players that have high ceilings and you want them to pan out, you want them to turn into JJ Peterka for the most part. Like when they're playing, you want them to be second on your team in points and third in goals and second in assists. That's what you want. I mean, he's tied for second in points with Dahlin. So he's your second highest point scoring forward. Mm-hmm. And he's, your third best point scoring player because Dahlin is slightly better at point per game he's slightly better points per game pace than Peterka is. But with that said, all of these players that you've drafted are not all going to turn into NHL caliber players, much less top two line NHL caliber players. And I acknowledge the point that you made, Mike, about is that actually his role because the Sabres are just bad? That's a very fair point. But I guess my again, this is where I seesaw back on is a good player could get you more in an area you maybe need more. And I think if the Sabres do get Mitch Marner by some act of God, that I'm at that point okay saying, yeah, let's move Peterka at that point.
Agreed.
And try to get a better defensive asset. But until that day when Mitch Marner is under contract with Buffalo, I don't want to take a player who at 23 years old has improved over his 2 years in the NHL, projecting to be a top two line player and a power play player, a goal scorer, which, I mean, you need to score goals to win games, and has developed in your system, I'll say correctly or successfully, and you don't know that every other player is going to do that. I like that we brought up Tyson Kozak last year. I don't know that he's going to score as many points as Peterka. I don't know that Ostlund. I don't know that Costa Helenius. I don't know that, well, Rusek is a different story right now, but, I don't know that all of these other drafted aspects are going to turn into players that can produce this highly at the NHL level. So personally, I'm hesitant to trade him for that reason because he is an example of the system working, and it's a way to get talent without having to worry about the taxes situation. But of course, that brings up the conversation. If he doesn't want to sign a long-term contract for, XYZ reason, then you can't do much about that.
The system what do you do then? What do you do?
He's an RFA too. The Sabres can match any deal that's there.
This is where you have the uncertainty. So he's an RFA.
I'm going to take this off. This is very warm. I apologize.
If he doesn't want to sign a long-term deal in Buffalo, but then another team goes after him and offers him a crazy long-term deal. Say the Rangers come in and they're offering him 7 years, $56 million or plus beyond that. Do you match it to say we're keeping our own? Do you let him go and take the draft picks? Then you have the scenario where what do the Sabres want to do? Do you bridge him on 2-year deal and try to get him for like $5 million, $6 million, and then you revisit it in a couple of years? There's a lot of different scenarios. I think for me personally, what I want, I would probably bridge him right now because it doesn't seem like either side really has interest in a long-term deal. The problem about bridging him is that he could just be gone in the future, and then you might not get anything out of it. So that becomes a scary situation where if you just lose a guy for next to nothing, And right when you're trying to hit that winning period, this is why I am so interested in this free agent market and the trade market, because if they do have a bold move up their sleeve, as you just said, Vinny, that changes my opinion on Peterka 100%. If you told me today that the Sabres thought that they could get Mitch Marner, you know what I'm doing? I'm willing to trade Peterka in that scenario, because we're not going to be able to sign him long term, and we're gonna. And you know what you do? You get your steady right hand defensive defenseman to go with power, and then you just solve two problems.
Call it back.
So a lot of what my thought on Peterka is going to be dependent on what else is in store, and that's why it's so hard to talk about these isolated players, because it's my opinion is going to change based on each thing they do. A couple of the names that have been brought up recently is maybe go after Marco Rossi. If you trade Quinn and somebody else and you get Marco Rossi, maybe you want to see what Peterka would do next to a Rossi. If you trade Byram and you get a defensive defenseman to go with power or right-hand D, maybe you're not as desperate to really change your forward room because you feel better about your defense room, and maybe you can't get an upgrade over Peterka. So, and then you have the other question on top of this, where at the end of the season last year, you had Benson and Kulik playing with Tage on the top line, and we didn't even have Norris playing at that point, which there's a lot of – I have a lot of hope for some of these guys that are going to be on the Sabres next year. But it seems like a shakeup is inevitable. I said it late in the season last year that trading Dylan Cousins was basically the first step in admitting their mistakes of the past, that they didn't construct the roster properly, that they put too much faith in their youth. And what I am basically taking away from that is Kevin Adams was basically like, you know what, guys, my plan didn't work. It's Lindy Ruff saying, Kevin, we got boys on this team. Like, these guys don't listen. Like, you would hear things about how early in the season they weren't taking Ruff's defensive strategy seriously, how they thought he was too old and out of date. I don't care if he's too old and out of date. He's the coach. Do what he tells you to do, Jesus. Like if you're not even going to try to do what he's doing, you can't blame the coach. You got to blame the players. And so much, you hear about the culture, you hear about these problems. I'm almost starting to wonder if, like, this culture of losing this, just the shittiness that surrounds the Sabres, if it has infected several of our young players, and if they just feel at this point, we just got to get rid of some of these guys. They're not going to figure it out. And you hear how Darlene talks about how Zucker was a much-needed voice and someone that he leaned on heavily. When I hear that, I'm basically here. I mean, like, yes, Oposo was a good voice in the room too, but Oposo wasn't contributing anymore. He couldn't do anything. He was an old man playing in
we're out of the playoffs by November.
Zucker scoring goals on the power play. He's a 20-point goal scorer, put up 50-plus points. What I'm hearing from everything the Sabres are telling me is Lindy is saying, I need veterans. I need guys that have been there, that have done it, that know how to play winning hockey, because there's a lot of talk, and I think Peterka might fall in this category. This is why I bring up Peterka, and I'm concerned about him a little bit. There's a lot of talk when it comes to skill players that sometimes they care more about putting up their numbers than they do making the right play on the ice in a situation. And my fear is that in the Sabres locker room, with all of those skill guys that they've accumulated, that maybe there's a little bit more of an emphasis on them putting up numbers than it is playing hockey the right way. And my belief is that the Sabres think they need to get rid of some of the young guys because they have been basically just screwed up in the head. You're seeing Cousins now in Ottawa. He looks like the same messed up guy. He had a little glimpse, and then he went back to himself. Middlestat leaves Buffalo. He looks horrible. Some of these guys in Buffalo, they're not who we think they are. And I think that's what Lindy has been admitting. And you look at the roster, you shouldn't get rid of a Tuck. That's a guy that plays a role you need. McLeod comes from an outside organization, comes in right away, and he looks better than almost everybody on the ice for the Sabres. Is that, to me, when you have a guy like Zucker and McLeod come in from outside organizations, from teams that have won in the past, and they look like your best forwards outside of Tage and Tuck, that tells me that some of these young guys are not truly the players that are putting up the stats that they're putting up, that they're products of just playing time and going after things. I'm not saying I don't like Peterka. I'm not saying Peterka
of course.
is that guy. Like, I like Peterka. I would keep him, but I don't know how the organization feels about Peterka.
Yeah.
Because if they were confident that he truly was this 28 goal scorer, like they were with Dylan Cousins, I think they're coming after him with a 7-year, $49 million contract.
Yeah, and I think that's the big question marks for me is, a lot of these unknowns are things of that, quote unquote culture realm of, that Dylan Cousins being moved, guys on that front. I think, that's why you see even like a guy like an Eric Saul brought in, Jarmo, like those guys in the locker room having bigger voices of Zucker. We hear Lindy Ruff talking about that. I think that's what we're going to see on that front and why it is so important. I want to go through a couple of these comments real quick just from popping in. Thanks to the nearly 4,000 people who clicked into the stream tonight. We're almost, getting through our Sabres talk tonight. In terms of Byram trade, Peterka extension, I mean, I feel like everywhere you look on, Sabres Twitter, everyone's to feel like on the agreement that Byram is gone. I feel like I rarely see anyone talking, building their lineups for next year and having Byram being a part of that. I don't think it makes much sense. I don't really see it either. Bun talked about it a bit of Byram kind of taking that step back whenever he was not paired with Darlene, which is true. I'm also in the camp of a Peterka extension. I put out that video a couple days ago. I mean, the kid's 23, put up 68 points. And he did it too. I feel like, I don't know if this is just my brain, slowly rotting away now that the frontal lobe is fully developed, but I feel like earlier in the year we saw Peterka move throughout different lines to give him a spark, whether that was reuniting the kids line to give him a little juice for some time, kind of moving up first two. I think he played third a little bit to get that juice. He found some success away from Tage at times. And it's not just a product of playing with good players. Like, I think he's young. He plays the game too, where it's not, a Jack Quinn we've seen in previous iterations of just throwing pucks to the net and not great hockey. Like he has his lulls, that does happen, but from an overall standpoint, I've liked his game. I think the Sabres can work with it, but I think it's really dumb of me to say this. I'm probably going to regret saying this, but I feel like I don't want to say the T word of trust, but I want to believe that the group that they brought in this offseason to leadership, coming from Lindy Ruff last season, having a bit more mold there, bringing Jarmo, hopefully Kevin Adams getting another year of experience under his belt, that there's something there that we know there's a culture change that needs to happen in Buffalo of getting out some of the issues which you see with, Jack Quinn, Casey Middlestat, bringing guys like McLeod, like Buns talked about. So I think that's the talk of the offseason, why we're here. What are those moves going to look like? Vinny, I don't know if you have any thoughts on what this offseason could look like with those two big names for the Sabres of Peterka, Byram.
Yeah, I do think that, and I like AJ's questions here because
Yeah.
the first one is a really good question. I think what one's more likely, a Byram trade or a Peterka extension? I almost want to flip the question. Is that what's more likely, a Byram extension or a Peterka trade?
Oh.
Because I think it's possible that Byram might get bridged, just because then he could become a UFA because he is an RFA, and now you enter a different sphere of the conversation. But in this literal question, I do think that a Byram trade is, I don't know. I mean, I think a Byram trade being more likely means that they're both getting traded, which I think is probably, if you're going to combine the two scenarios, that's I think the more realistic situation is that Byram gets traded, because again, it just seems like it's an inevitability. And
if this said Byram Bridge, this said Byram Bridge or not a Byram Bridge, I mean a Peterka Bridge or a Byram trade, what would you do there? Because extension, you're thinking like long term, but like if you heard Peterka signs like a 2-year deal,
Right.
And then it's Byram get traded. Like you might say like 100% to both of those possibly,
Yeah.
depending on what your thought is.
I agree. And I think I wrote down one thing here when you were talking, because I think when you bridge, if you do bridge Peterka, then you're obviously at the tail end of that thinking you could lose him for nothing. He could walk in free agency. The other element of that, and you take this risk, this is sports, but if you trade him now, the asset or assets plural that you trade him for might only also contribute to you for 2 or 3 years, and you might be able to get more for them. They may also walk. That situation is possible. So I think in my mind right now, I want the Peterka contributions for 2 years on this bridge deal.
Agreed.
And I also think to a certain extent, this brings up that point, which is winning fixes everything. If the Sabres figure out how to win next year and the year after that, then Peterka might be willing to sign long-term because, hey, you know what? You guys figured out I'm enjoying playing here. We're winning. I have a good spot. We brought in this person. They've actually helped me out a lot in my hockey development. I learned what it means to, I don't know, try harder on defense. I'm just putting words in the guy's mouth, which is unfair. But my point is, I personally, again, want to keep him for those reasons. AJ, just really good points here. I think it is interesting when you look at that Byram trade. I don't think it was just to get Middlestat. I do think that it was a win-win scenario. You wanted to get a change of scenery for Casey Middlestat. You wanted to get an asset for him. You got a defensive asset for him that could contribute offensively. Byram comes here. He didn't fail. He played well, and Middlestat had left the Avalanche roster while Byram was still here. I'd consider that a successful trade. And now ultimately, I do think it just kind of slots in that maybe the Sabres did underestimate Byram's desire to be a number one defenseman. Maybe they thought he would really enjoy being in this situation. Maybe they thought, hey, if this guy can play better than Owen Power consistently, he'll just be one of our top 2 defensemen. That's maybe not necessarily the situation he finds himself in. So it might just be one of those situations that the two sides didn't find that mutual long-term amicable agreement. So they took that shot, if you will. They got good production out of the guy for a little while, turned him into an asset that's maybe equal or slightly less than he was when they traded him traded Middlestat for him, and moved on from there. That's kind of my thinking. I definitely think the Sabres need help defensively. And again, I'm not really right now willing to move Peterka to get that. I want to bridge the guy if we can't find a long-term deal for him. So I think trying to move Byram, and maybe like it was said, Steve said this earlier. He's like, we have a guy that was in our system that developed that's producing. I don't want to get rid of him because we know he's working. Let's move assets that aren't as proven yet. Yes, they're not worth as much, but right now, and this is exactly the comment I'm referencing, he's a prospect that developed into a solid player. He could be a great player. He could be a 40-point player. There's always that chance of that happening. The non-developed prospects do have that potential, but because they aren't proven, their value isn't nearly as high. But there isn't really a roster spot for a lot of them right now. I went through the names earlier on the Rochester roster. Rusick right now, again, signing for not playing in North America next year. But, what happens with Isak Roseanne? What happens with Ostlund? What happens with Hellenius? What happens with Kozak? Those 4 names alone are players that, Hellenius didn't really play with, and Ostlund didn't play with the Sabres really this year, but Roseanne played a little bit with the Sabres, and Kozak, of course, did for quite a while.
Love Kozak.
And then you slot them in. Benson's another younger player that's been playing in the NHL now for 2 years. What are their roles going forward? They're not yet proven, but
trade chips.
If you are moving Byram and another one of those assets, is that going to get you a more productive player at the defensive level? For the Sabres, it's great that Rochester's been so good for a while, and you love that they have a lot of depth. I think sometimes you have to sacrifice that for success at the NHL level, even though it means that your farm system is going to suffer. It's great that for Washington, Hershey and Washington are both good. That's not typically how it goes. Maybe one team in the AHL and NHL is a playoff contender year in and year out. But what should, quote unquote, happen is that your AHL team is good because you have prospects developing. Your NHL team is not as good. Those prospects develop, go to the NHL, become good. There's a transitioning phase. And then your AHL team maybe not as good because you don't have prospects in the pipeline because you've traded them or moved them or called them up for players that can play and make your NHL team good. on paper, that's how it should work. It doesn't always work like that. I understand. But I definitely think that the production that you're seeing from Peterka is the reason, in my opinion, you should be keeping him. And because it seems like it's not working out with Byram, see if, maybe you can move him with another NHL player. I hate saying thing as if it's a person. It's a real living human being that has feelings and heartbeats and a brain. But I'm treating them as a trade asset right now, and that's not fair. But I do think that's maybe the best return for the Sabres.
The counter to Peterka, though, is that what if the Sabres have evidence and numbers that prove to them that he's not what we all think he is? Like they're dealing with him in practice every day. What if they are trying to tell him and get him to do things and he's just not like on the same page? This is all hypothetical.
Well, let me get back to the whole trusting the Sabres. Like they're going to do the right thing.
Like, that's another thing. Like, are the Sabres, like, do they know what they're doing? Like there's so many other rabbit holes this can open up. But like, say at practice, Peterka is just not what, like, things aren't getting through to him. Like, that could be another issue. What if they have analytics that show maybe his numbers, like goals, assists, points, plus minus, is better than what metrically they feel like he should be doing, or that maybe he hurts them in other areas, or they're trying to go to a different style. There's a lot of other things that we don't know about the situation. So it is a little bit difficult to really formulate all of our thoughts without that information. I'm with you, though, Vinny. I'm keeping him right now unless there is a for sure guy you're getting back that is proven that can fit in right away. I do want to add to your Rochester point. That's another reason why I'm so optimistic about the Sabres and what they can do this offseason is because, yes, typically when you build up your minor league team and the prospect pool and everything, it's for them to have spots on your NHL team in the future. And the Sabres are one of those rare bad teams where they really don't have a lot of those openings in the future, which makes them tradable assets. And I'm not saying they're going to get high-end players in return, but you can package them with a draft pick or with guys already on your team like Byram / Peterka to get a higher return on investment than what you typically would in the past. So I look at this as like the Sabres right now are in that situation right now where with the roster they have, yes, there's holes. They have salary cap room, they have prospects, and they have tradable assets that are NHL level players that will warrant good return, that they can really make major shakeups without having to throw everything out there. They can risk a couple prospects and still have a good prospect pool. They could spend a Byram or a Peterka and still have a good forward room or a good defense room. So I do think there's a lot of ways that they can exploit this for their benefit. And then I do want to address the whole Middlestat Byram thing quick as well. I don't think it was a weird trade. To me, it was a guy in Middlestat that the Sabres didn't believe had a long-term future on the Sabres despite his production in Buffalo. They didn't want to give him the contract that Middlestat was seeking. And they saw a chance to take a chance on a young top 5 pick defenseman who helped Colorado win a cup and kind of just see where it would go. If it worked out and he turned into something great, awesome. Maybe we trade low, we get something back high in return. If it doesn't work out, whatever, like we move on from him. I don't think this is a situation where Byram didn't work out for the Sabres. I think Byram actually exceeded expectations in Buffalo.
It was a gamble, too. He had concussion issues in Colorado.
The Sabres clearly won this trade, Byram and Middlestat. The issue that happened with the Sabres here is that they already have 2 established defensemen, one established and one that they have a number 1 overall pick invested in, that they weren't going to let Byram take over their roles. And if, like I said earlier, if Byram was a $3, $4, $5 million defenseman, he's back in Buffalo. They're keeping him. He's in a depth role.
Yep.
But in this situation, they can't pay another person $7, $8 million to be an average defenseman. So it's basically acknowledging right now, Byram, you're a good player. We got a lot. You were better than what we expected. But you know what? We don't have a role for you going forward where you're going to be a $7, $8 million defenseman and bring that value to our team. But there are likely going to be other teams that might be willing to give you that role, and we might be able to get another quality thing in return. So if you actually look at this long term and you say, okay, you trade Middlestat for Byram, and then if you trade Byram and you get a really good right-hand defensive defenseman to go along with Power, you could – I know you can't say 1 + 1 = blah blah blah, but really in reality that would mean that whoever you traded Byram for, you basically got Middlestat for that. So this could end up being one of those trades where getting Byram maybe wasn't long-term solution for you, but it helped in your finding long-term solutions. It gave you the asset that allowed you to make the move that you needed in a time where if you would have just kept Casey Middlestat, you wouldn't be in that spot. If you hadn't traded for Byram, you wouldn't be in that spot. So I don't think it's weird. I don't think it's a negative. If anything, I think it's a sign that the Sabres are actually smart enough and self-aware enough that we took a risk and now we're going to turn this guy into something even better for our team moving forward.
And that's the parallel I think we're seeing between these two guys right now is it's not that Byram didn't work out. It's his spot's not there for what the Sabres can pay for him. And we're kind of seeing this now with Peterka a little bit in terms of the Sabres forward. But I think we're going to have this conversation a lot more in the next couple of years of, okay, we have all these young forwards. What is your production now? What can it be? Can we pay you this much money to be a third line guy? Who knows? And I think that's going to be interesting to see what the Sabres do here and kind of set that precedent for their younger guys of, okay, you can produce here and you can get paid somewhere else too at that same point. So I think it's really interesting to go into that front. Vinny, do you have any other things here on Peterka and Byram?
And I mean, only to say that, yeah, I don't know that. I think I'm worried. I don't know. Maybe not worried is the right word, but I know there's some prospective trades about like the Kings. I don't think they're moving Quentin Byfield. I'm not an insider. I really don't know that Byfield is going to be the return. And I also don't know that you want Byfield in the return. I think you want defensemen. I think that's the team need right now. Yeah, sure. I mean, I do like the idea of getting Mitch Marner because of adding goal scoring. And it's a bit hypocritical for me to say, well, if we move Peterka and don't get Marner, I would still want a defenseman. But I think that's your biggest hole right now. I don't want you to steal a phrase that I saw on TikTok. I don't want you to be making the bed while the house is on fire. Like your priority needs to be where the needs are, and getting more goal scoring is great. But right now I think your need is on the back end and to a certain extent also in net, but that's a little bit harder to fix. And we haven't really talked about that at all today because I think right now it's just kind of talking in circles. But
yeah,
on the
we need a
blue
whole new
line,
podcast for goaltending.
Yeah, absolutely. We could go another 3.5 hours on in between that. But not to lean too far into the sayings, but on the blue line right now in Buffalo, you have 3 defensemen that in theory play similar roles, like Mike said. Mm-hmm. And with Dahlin and Power and Byram, that doesn't fit your mold right now for success in the I don't even mean long term as in years and years. I mean over the course of an 82 game season, having 3 of those very similar style players is not going to work because a Jack, a Queen, and a King is a great hand in poker, but a very bad hand in blackjack. So you need to use one of those pieces. You can't trade cards in blackjack, but you can in the NHL. And I think you need to utilize that to get you a piece that plays a different role. And with that said, that is a defenseman in my mind.
I love that analogy, Vinny. That's a good one.
Thank you.
You think Owen Power's the queen in that situation?
I would definitely put Dahlin as the king. I mean, he is your best player, I think, on the roster. Tage probably being second. And then McLeod obviously third. But I'm being somewhat facetious. But my point is the reality is, I think Dahlin is the king, and I suppose Power would be the queen if you're just going to go by. I mean, they're worth the same in cards, right? True. So it doesn't really matter what they're like. They're a value. Mm-hmm. That's a valuable player, and I think Owen Power probably in that situation. I think he could be the queen, and he fits that role right now if he can develop into being a useful piece. And then that Jack role, they're all similar. And that kind of goes into my point. Having 3 of them isn't really what you need.
Hey, this is the Talking Poker podcast. No, I like that. And the one kind of final thing I want to touch on that is the biggest reason too, I think they're moving on from Byram is anyone they realize can play with Rasmus Dahlin and play above their level. We saw Henry Jokiharju do that. Matthias Samuelsson looks good playing there. Literally, I think Bunty, you suit up and play alongside 26. you're putting up a couple points next year. You don't want to. I don't think the Sabres want to give that money to Byram, especially when they move him away. It's not that same production, obviously. Him and Power wasn't my favorite thing in the world. So I think it just kind of makes sense for all parties to move on from that point. And we touched on Tage a little bit. He had a good little run in the World Championship, scoring the golden goal for USA. And guys, what did you think of Tage getting the gold medal for USA, winning the golden goal?
Posting up.
Yeah, that was neat. It was cool to see him get to wear red, white, and blue. I know that was something that seems like it'd be important for him in a 0-0 game, mind you, too. Like, I think he had the hat trick earlier in the tournament, and then maybe wasn't as loud on the score sheet, but that was a beautiful shot that he scored in overtime, and really cool for him to get that experience. That's a winning. I mean, that was one of the more important games of his hockey career. And I bet that felt pretty dang good. So I'm happy for him. It was really interesting. I thought when I would go down like the stat list that he would be higher in terms of like scoring leaders, but he's actually he was 21st in terms of points with 9 across 10 games played, which is a perfectly solid stat line. But yeah, I was sort of based on with that outburst with the hat trick game, and then, I mean, scoring the only goal in the 0-0 game, of course, you're not going to get more than that points because there's only 1 point on the board for you to have. If you're going to score the goal, the most you can have is 2 other people with the assists, right? And you can't score the goal and get the assists on your own tally. But my point is, I guess it would have been cool to see him up towards the top 10, with the, like Crosbys and Konechny's and Lindholms of the world. But I think that's a really good experience for Thompson, and I'm glad to see he got that. I mentioned being okay with him not being on the roster back in February because he was battling a little bit of an injury. Now I think going forward, it's ridiculous to have him not on Team USA for any international competition ever going. Well, I mean, not ever. I'm sure in 20 years, he's probably not in good enough shape to play international hockey. But for the next few years, I think Tage Thompson has to be in the Team USA starting lineup.
Yeah, I thought it was great for Tage, great for Team USA, and it's funny. It showed how few people, even in the hockey community, hockey fans in this country, know about the World Championships. It's funny because some people are making jokes like, "What tournament? Like USA's first win in 92 years?" And then other people are saying like, "This tournament's a joke." No, this is the World Championship.
Sidney Crosby's there.
Yeah, Sidney Crosby's there. I think McKinnon might have been there.
Yeah.
Canada had legit like top MVP caliber players over there. So this isn't some joke. Now, it's not as prestigious as what the World Junior Championships are, and that's because every December and January you have the top junior players in the world. But it's one of those things where Tage was in the world scene, playing for USA. And he ended up having what will go down as one of the most memorable goals of his career. He ended a 92-year drought for Team USA in the World Championships. So that is something that he'll remember forever. Giving gold to your country, that's something to have a ton of pride in. And I think it put him in the spotlight for all of international hockey right there. So he should be incredibly proud. Sabres fans should be incredibly proud. Tage is a star in the NHL who probably doesn't get the love he deserves because he's on the Sabres. Had he played for the New York Rangers, he would have been on Team USA in the Four Nations. Because he could have been a 30-point player on the New York Rangers, and Chris Drury would have found a way to get him on Team USA. Tage is averaging over 40 goals a year, basically, the last 4 years. That's a guy that deserves a lot more love than what he gets. And when it comes to the World Championship and people calling it a joke, here's the thing. The NHL playoffs go on during it, which severely limits the NHL players in this tournament. So this is not like what the Olympics used to be when all the NHL players were in it. This is not like some other international tournament. So it's definitely not that highest of the high talent level, despite having Crosby, McKinnon, Tage in this. But still, this is a legitimate world tournament. The reason why it's played during the NHL playoffs is because all the European nations have their seasons end by that time. They play this tournament, I believe, in Europe every year because there wouldn't obviously be much fan interest in the States when it's coinciding during the same time as the NHL playoffs. So this is a very European style tournament. They get a lot of their top players to play in it. And yes, the Team USA isn't all stars and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take some pride when your player has a big moment in a tournament like this. So I'm happy for him. And really, anybody putting it down, who gives a crap? Like, if it's the level of the Olympics or not, it means something to him. He used it as a way to prove his value to his country and to basically guarantee they don't overlook him again. And I think now it's pretty much assured that he's going to be on every Team USA roster that he wants to be going into the future.
Yeah, I think Steve brings up a good point. Bunty said 90-plus year drought broken by Tage Thompson. 14 years is basically 90 at this point. At least it feels like it. That would be great. And like you said, I mean, it's basically a tryout for the Olympics next year. It seems like he's deserved it. Left off 4 nations. That's great. And, great for the confidence too. I mean, he's scoring 40 goals every year. It feels like I'd be confident. So should only help him grow on that front. Also, it's nice just to get some good news, things to talk about Buffalo Sabres players playing in national or international competition. Vinny, I don't know if you have any final thoughts on Tage here before we start to wrap things up here on the Crossing Swords podcast.
I feel like we covered that pretty solid. It was a shame that got mixed in. It wasn't as popular as we would have liked it to be.
Yeah.
That was another situation. I would have liked to have watched that game live, but I wasn't able to. There's other things going on. That game happens, and it's just it's not a lot of pomp and circumstance for what was something that actually was really incredible.
Tough too when the games are on at like noon on a Wednesday.
Yeah, which is a great I mean, I work mostly in the afternoon, so in theory, more days than not, that would be a great time for me to watch a really good game of hockey. But yeah, oh well, maybe next time.
Yeah, next time. And then, speaking next time, it's been 19 years since the Sabres lost to Carolina in 2006.
I was alive for that, guys. I was older than you guys. I don't know if you remember.
You don't think we were alive for that game?
No. I'm joking. What I meant was I'm old enough to remember that game. I don't know if you guys have any memories of it, but just realize we were less than 20 minutes away from going to the Stanley Cup Finals, and I felt like we were going to the Cup, and we were going to play Edmonton, and we were going to win the Cup.
Yeah.
So that was the closest I ever felt to we are going to bring a championship home, because I wasn't alive for the Bills Super Bowl. Well, I wasn't alive for Wide Right. So still scarred from that.
So I will say this I remember though I don't know if I've told the story before. I'm not going to do it now. We're already an hour and 47 minutes. But that
longest podcast ever.
That Sabres, those 2 Sabres teams, specifically the year prior, the Brian Campbell, RJ Umberger hit. The reason that the game following, the Briere goal and double overtime, the reason I got into hockey. And those are the things, that game is the reason that I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, because the way Rick Jeanneret made me feel that day, I wanted to do that when I grew up. So going forward, of course, to this Carolina game, I remember watching it and just being very confused as to why Tony Ludman was playing every single shift. And I was so confused by that. And I didn't comprehend at the time, because I was 6 years old, that the entire defensive unit was just dilapidated. And Jay McKee having the foot issue was really hard for me to understand, that he couldn't play as of that morning. So I remember just being really confused, because at the time I didn't understand how that worked. Because when you're a 6-year-old, your parents can just tell you oh, well, they were hurt. They couldn't play. They had an injury. And I basically was well, then why couldn't just take some medicine? This was an important game. And they were no, it's a little more serious than that. And I remember not being able to comprehend that as a 6-year-old, but being very sad, because I thought that it was inevitable that they would just win and play more hockey. And them, of course, not being able to, because again, it just seems like they kind of ran out of gas in that last 20 minutes. really, really tough. And I 100% believe that if they had even just Jay McKee in that game, that they were winning and they were going on with again, like you mentioned, they were a great matchup against Edmonton that year.
Yeah, the shame of it was Carolina was actually a better team than the Sabres that season, but the Sabres were playing their butts off in that series. During the regular season, Carolina had kind of owned the Sabres in the regular season games, but Sabres were in the position to take it and unfortunately couldn't. Looks like we lost Gatesy right now, Vinny.
Yeah,
So I'd say this is the perfect way to end almost 2 hours of Sabres talk in the first day of June. This is crazy, Vinny. I don't think we've ever had a podcast go this long about the Buffalo Sabres.
I don't think so. I mean, we had so much to talk about, and there's more we didn't even.
Honestly, we didn't even talk goalie. We didn't.
No, we
like
didn't.
Goalie could be another topic for another show. So, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, we didn't talk about the draft lottery at all, which is maybe not worthy of as long as a conversation, but I think this is evidence in a microcosm. This is a microcosm of maybe what could exist more regularly in a different perspective if the Sabres had been good, because, and I think this is one of those things that, like you made the point earlier, that it's hard to sell Buffalo. I think it's not as hard to sell Buffalo as maybe at times it's made out to be. I know there's always difficulties. It's really easy to sell. Yeah, like right now, pretty easy to sell Florida. But I think one of the things that you have is just a fan base that's so eager to have wins, and even just like little wins, right? Jarmo Kekalainen hire, that's a little victory. And so I think celebrating little victories is something that, I mean, we've been talking about victories and losses now for almost 2 hours. I mean, I can't imagine how much more fun these are going to be. And this was a good time. I had a blast. How much more fun these will be when inevitably it gets figured out. And how, because people are ready to pay attention and people are ready to make Buffalo a hockey town again, which is, it's a great, when players in the NHL don't know, like, you know, Jaromir Jagr's not around anymore. Tyler Myers is ready to retire. There's very few players in the NHL that were here or even playing in the NHL still. I know there's the Crosbys and the Ovechkins that have been there for a while, but the guys that are in free agency and like actually going to teams were not around when the Sabres were good. And then when Buffalo was A, hard to play as an away team, and B, really fun to play in as a home team. And eventually that's going to come back because that energy still exists. That energy absolutely still exists here.
Yeah, I sure hope so, Vinny. I'm tired of waiting. I remember what it was like when I was a kid. 4 Eastern Conference Finals trips, 1 Stanley Cup appearance. When I was a kid, I just expected the Sabres to be good. And it definitely stinks that entire generation of kids and teens never got to see the Sabres be good. And I think it's had a noticeable impact in this community, because I grew up knowing that this was a hockey town. And a lot of people that are probably your age or slightly younger, they have no idea what that means. They have no idea the importance that this hockey team has in this community and what it's like when they're good. I know the Bills have dominated. I'm diehard Bills and Sabres. When the Sabres had Briere and Drury, this was more of a hockey town at that point than it was a Bills town. Not just because of what the Sabres were doing. Obviously, the Bills being bad played a big role in that.
But this city was basically the opposite of what's going on right now.
But it was electric.
Yeah.
We weren't talking about the Bills on the sports talk shows. It was almost all Sabres at that point. So hopefully one day we can get the Sabres to be relevant again. This is going to be a big offseason for that. A lot of big changes already with Eric Stahl and Kekalainen. And next thing that's up is the NHL scouting combine. And then you're going to have a lot of discussions between management. Obviously, the draft is an off-site this year with a lot of people, them actually taking their war room to the Bills facility. So a lot to talk about in the upcoming weeks. We'll have more Crossing Swords podcast then. But for now, Vinny, thanks for joining me. Gatesy had his charger unplugged, lost his battery on his laptop. So He's sorry. He told me to have it finished up here. So we appreciate everybody watching, and enjoy the rest of the month of June. We'll be back in the next couple weeks.